I'd like to just go around and give just some quick introductions. My name is Patrick Montanaro. I'm the library assistant at the Ogden Farmers Library. I'm joined by...
my name is Caitlin Crilly. I'm the Teen Services and Genealogy Librarian at the Ogden Farmers Library.
And we are interviewing...
Sandy Brower, a longtime resident. Family came here in 1826, farmers. I lived in Spencerport when I was during the war years, so my experience with that village is like going back to the 1800s.
Wow.
Yes.
Very cool.
So I don't know if it's appropriate to ask, how old are you?
I will be very proud to tell you, 84 years old on June 21st, the last 20th, the last day of spring.
It's coming up.
That's fantastic.
You know, people are embarrassed nowadays. Everybody wants to live forever, but nobody wants to get old.
Yeah.
And I'm alive and well after, things happen. And I'm 8 years old. I'm going to be 9 years old tomorrow, But we should be proud because we're alive. And think of all those people, village people, town people that didn't make it out of their teen years, even for that matter. So 84 on last day of spring.
And so how much of that have you been in Spencerport in the Ogden area?
I left Spencerport. I was away for 25 years. I went down seeking my fame and fortune in Washington, D.C., and then Maryland's Eastern Shore in 74. So I was away for 25 years. But I am heart and soul, and I now live in North Chi-Li, but I'm still Ogden.
Mm-hmm.
Still Ogden like that. Mm-hmm. So I guess I've lived here for about, 25 from 84 is what? Let's make it 85 and just much easier. 60.
Wow.
Is it? Yeah. And I started going to the Ogden Library when we moved into the village in 1942 from Whittier Road.
Where on Whittier Road were you?
Okay, between Brower Road and Union Street, about halfway down, there was what's known as the Crest Farm. Then there was a little orchard, and then there was a little house back in there, and that's the little house we lived in.
Is it still there?
I think so. It's been improved since then, yes. And we moved into Spencerport in, I think it was the year of 1942. I would be starting first grade in 1943, which is the worst year of the war. Mm. And so it was like, 1943.
So I'm curious, what did the village look like back then?
I've been thinking about this. Miss McAdams, who was the history teacher at Spencerport High School from 1949 until she retired, I think in probably 1965 or 67, came from Olcott, which is up on Ridge Road up on the lake. Mm-hmm. And she was hired to come here in 1949 to teach history, world history, in the senior high school. And she said she came down the $1 Million Highway, which is the Brockport-Spencerport Road, because it cost $1 million to make that highway.
No kidding.
We never called it the Brockport Road. We always called it the $1 Million Highway. She came down, and it ends at the cemetery, Fairfield, and she made that left-hand turn and come down Union. And she said she came down and she went under the railroad bridge and thought she had stepped back into the 1880s. We knew exactly what she meant. The first thing she saw was on the corner of Slayton Avenue was this long building. It was a store, really, with two great big windows and a door in the middle. And in one of the windows was a stuffed full-size horse.
Well.
And it was Lisso's hardware store. And had never seen a lick of paint in all the years that it was there. It was weathered wood, and I would love to have that weathered wood to start a restaurant up with.
Yeah.
But that's the first thing she saw, and she said, "Oh my God!" And then up by the canal on the left-hand side, going north, was the Slayton Hotel. There was a building up there. It's hard to believe, but it was there. And so she saw these two edifices out there, and thinking, "Oh my gosh." Did I go back in history 45 years or 60 years ago? So that was her first impression. And Spencerport at that time was in, one foot was in the 1800s, the other foot was in the 1930s. World War II, when it started, effectively ended the Depression. And this little town was basically a farming community. It was surrounded by farms, big working farms with people whose ancestors had founded the farms, like the Colby brothers, the Chapman brothers. My father's grandfather founded in 1826. The Colbys were here in 1812. The Chapmans came soon thereafter. And so we had these big farms, and we all knew one another. The farmers knew everybody, and we found out many decades later that we were related to half of them. So it was a small little community here, not wealthy, but middle class people, very nice people. And life in the mid-40s during the war was you couldn't go anywhere because of rationing. My father had a farm up at the end of Talbot, the Talbot farm at the end of Martha Street, the south end.
Okay.
The canal was at the north end. So you went over the railroad tracks and you went down a little bit, and there was a great big doubled white house up there with some barns out back. And I'll tell you about those barns later. It was like stepping, the railroads were functioning. I think I knew of 2 people that commuted to Rochester on the railroad train because they went that way. And you could still see on West Avenue the trolley tracks. And when they stopped using the trolley and started using the train, and then eventually started using Greyhound bus, that changed dramatically there. In the summertime in Spencerport, as I remember in the 40s, in the mid-40s, in the warm summer evenings, and there's no place like New York State in late June on a June evening that's beautiful. People went for walks. They sat out on their front porch. Hi, how are you? They talked and they chatted. They needed one another as neighbors and as friends and as relatives. And there was this community thing. And then in 1948, Milton Berle and television came into it. And that negated the need for neighbors, negated the need for a front porch. Everybody went inside. It was entertained by television. But the town, for a while there, in the wintertime, I'm going to talk about it being a young child from 7 to 9 years old. Mr. Noble, up at the end of Maplewood Avenue, had an ice skate rink, a pond. And the ice that we put in our drink in the summertime was the ice we skated on in January and February. And the school had 500 students in it. Mr. Woods had 2 children that were older than me, I think, and he was a very interesting man. Mr. Woods, the principal, would bring a toboggan to school in the wintertime, and in the noontime he would come out with the students, and we'd go tobogganing in front of where the Burnaby School is now. There's a slope, and we would go barreling down that slope onto the athletic field. We were, hi, Mr. Woods, we were one-on-one talking to this man. We were not at least awed by him. And then he left, and Mr. Wilson came along, who was Mr. Wilson was more like a businessman. And he didn't have that kind of rapport that Mr. Woods did, but he had his own modus operandi to get things done and things like that. We would go in the wintertime, they would say at noontime, after lunch, we're all going to shut the school down, we're going to go ice skating at Noble's Pond. So we would all walk up to Noble's Pond. We came to school with our skates, and we would ice skate all afternoon to the skaters' waltz and everything, and go home crying because our toes were frozen. And thaw them out, have supper, and turn around and come back and do it at nighttime. And the cars from all the working men would line the pond, and the music was playing outside, and there were hundreds of people just skating around all evening long. And Mr. Noble had a little shack there with a pot-bellied stove, and he sold candy and drinks and stuff like that. And I can still to this day hear the skates going clump, clump, clump into the shack and things like that. That's what we did in the winter. And then between Union Street and Martha Street, just past between the railroad track and Maplewood Avenue on the west side, there's a hill, there's a valley. We used to go tobogganing there. Barreling down that hill, trees beware, and we all met there. It was a very small town because we all went to school together. We all knew each other from all sides of town, and we walked or we bicycled. And so we would toboggan in the wintertime and ice skate in the wintertime and do things like that. And as I say, our school was literally closed down for the afternoon. They didn't worry about, grades and things like that. They wanted us to go out and have fun and enjoy it. And it was the war years. And I think that they wanted to keep us in a normal life as much as possible. That was winter. And then the town, at Christmas time, the Oddfellows Hall above where the old Hart's food store was on the corner of Amity and Union Street, there was a hall up there. And every Christmas, the town fathers would have a Christmas party for all the town kids. And there would be about 300-400 of us come there, and we all got a bag of candy, and in the bottom of the bag was an orange. Oranges, you didn't have oranges year round. Orange was a special thing.
Yeah.
So the town tried as much as they could. In the summertime in school, between my second grade and third grade, I had just turned 8 that summer, the town fathers decided to have a 2-week summer program for children in the village. And guess where it was held? The playground we played on all year long in the school year. But we had a pool. It was, it was a rowboat with water. We didn't care. It was fun. We for 2 weeks like that, they did as much as they could do. And because we all knew one another, this was a very small town. I mean, I would leave my house at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and my mother knew where I was.
Yeah.
And she would get phone calls. Well, she just walked by, and I would come home at 5 o'clock because the dinner was on the table. And so everybody knew everybody, and we didn't worry about that. Children were out walking around. And it was a small town. People knew one another. They looked out for one another. I had some very interesting friends. In the summer, that summer of 1944, I was down at the foot of my driveway on Martha Street. Mrs. Bromley lived down there in a yellow butter house. It looked like butter. And I was going to be entering third grade that September, and I knew how to read, I knew how to write, and I knew who Abraham Lincoln was and who Washington was. And I also knew Mrs. Bromley was 85 years old. So one summer afternoon, I was down there and I was chatting away with her, and I said, Mrs. Bromley, do you remember Lincoln? She said, I remember the day he died. And I said, well, what was that like? And she said, it was very sad. And then 18 years later, I went through the same thing in 1963, very sad day like that. But she had 2 brothers that ran, she had 2 brother-in-laws who ran a cigar shop between the old post office and the feed store right downtown. The old post office now is Uncle Sammy's restaurant or somebody's restaurant down there. There's a little restaurant down there.
Is that Grandpa Sam's?
Grandpa Sam, yeah. That was originally part of the post office down there. And the Bromley brothers had a cigar store down there, and they sold the Sunday papers. And when I was 7 years old, I went down there once every Sunday mornings to help them sell the papers. They allowed people. They accepted kids. We were allowed to be children.
Yeah.
We were essentially, up until 1957, when Sputnik went up and everything else went out the window, we were allowed to be what we were. If we were children, we were not told bad things. They didn't want us to know about bad stuff. It wasn't our business to know. We would just give us as normal a life as possible. And I remember, going back, I've lost my train of thought there.
Well, I have a question for you. I'm going back a little bit in the conversation, but you had mentioned the tobogganing through the trees. Did you ever get hurt?
Nobody ever got hurt. No. I fell off a horse.
Oh, really?
We had horses on the farm. It was called the Talbot Farm. It was owned by a man named John Talbot on Martha's. I think it was about 50 acres with a peach orchard. And we had a horse there, and of course kids from all around came to see the horses. And horses were still pretty big back in those days. And when we moved up to Chambers Street in 51, Walt Barton, who lived across the road from us, tilled what was known as the old Frank Haroon farm on the corner of Chambers and Union, and on the west side. And he had a team of black horses. He went out and he tilled with horses. Not unusual. And so we grew up there, and his wife would be out there. They grew cauliflower one year, and she was out there on her hands and knees with rubber bands, bringing the leaves up to cover up the cauliflowers so they would branch. They never grew cauliflower after that.
Yeah. It's one bad growing season.
As I say, it was mainly an agrarian. I saw it from the agrarian, the farmer's viewpoint, like that. Horse shows and cowboys were pretty big back then. The funeral parlor, Walker Brothers Funeral Parlor, was owned by Albert Fosmeyer and Lester Mers. And Lester was into horses. And when you go in the funeral parlor, there's a big funeral parlor on West Avenue, and then down below is this building, and there used to be a paddock down there. They stabled 3 horses there. They had a tack room, and the south half of the building was for horses, and the other half was for spare coffins. And I grew up around a funeral parlor. And they had 3 horses down there, and one of them was reputed to have been on Gene Autry's ranch. And let me tell you, that's powerful back in those days, like that. And we had rodeos going around up at the Plantation Pines. They had rodeos every summer up there. And we had the carnival would come in June, usually the last week of school, and we were testing, but we all looked forward to the carnival. And the whole world turned up the parade on Friday nights when they had it, and they really had some parades there. And then we all floated down to the carnival grounds, and that was June. And in the wintertime, when I lived on Brockport, Spencerport, in the wintertime, Harold Wright he took over he made a Firestone store just up from the street there. What's the name of the street after Slayton Avenue coming towards the bridge?
Oh, is that Church Street? That's right there?
Well, it's where West Avenue continues on right through, right there. There was a jewelry store, and then there was a store that became Firestone store. And Harold Wright used to own the Atlantic gas station on the other corner of West Avenue and Union. He got out of the gas business and got into the appliance business. And every Christmas he would put a speaker up on his roof, and you could hear the music a mile away playing Christmas carols all the time. And when television came, it was a big deal. Most of us didn't have television, but Harold put a television set in his window, a round DuPont television. And all of us would gather in front of the window and look at television. And his wife would come out and chat with us. It made no difference how young or how old we were. We were just treated all the same. And that was our gathering place. And then eventually most people got TVs, and you didn't go downtown anymore for entertainment like that. So we had individuals doing their little part to add to the spirit of things like that and everything. I remember my mother my sister was in the Girl Scouts, and they had a parade. They would have a parade on Memorial Day. Everybody came out for that. And there was a picture of Mom and Maxine Davison, who was the telephone company lady. She and Donald owned the company, and her daughter Hallie was in the same troop as my sister Karen. And we took a picture of them, and in the background, down between the bridge and the railroad tracks, were telephone poles with 6 arms going across, and the lines drooping down like that. And there were trees. There was a big tree in the corner of West Avenue and Union, right in front of the fire hall. And the fire hall was where I gravitated, especially to the second floor. That was where the library was. And my mother was a reader. And when we moved into the village, I know when I was 5 years old, she would go to the library, and we would go along with her because she read books to us. And my 3 brothers and my sister and I are avid readers, and that's how you get children to read. You read these stories, and then they want to go get their own books. And the library upstairs on the second floor over the fire hall was just a big room, but they had great big windows on it, no air conditioning. And those hot July, summer, August afternoons, when you were sagging with the damp, with the humidity and stuff, I would trudge myself down to the library and go upstairs and sit in the window overlooking Harold Wright's Atlantic gas station and watch the Greyhound bus come down under the railroad tracks, make that left-hand turn, go up to Church Street and come right around to pick up people like that. The fan was oscillating in the background, and you could hear people clumping up the stairs and things going on. The librarian never... I remember, as far as I can remember, the first librarian I remember was Marion Carpenter. Now, she was the town piano teacher, and her house was on the corner of Martha Street and West Avenue on the south side. And she was the librarian, and she was a schoolmate of my father at Spencerport.
Okay.
Then Mrs. Stewart came in, and that was Carol Barton, Gary Barton's grandmother. And Mrs. Stewart lived in a beautiful Federal-style house up on West Avenue. And she was the town librarian then. And then the library moved up to West Avenue, where the town offices are now. Mm-hmm. And Ann Curtis and another lady named Jane worked there. And even when I didn't live here anymore, when I came home, I always went down and visited them. And Ann would call my mother and say, Margaret, we've got some books for you we might like. So they, impersonal things like that. The library was a very important source. When I go to a new place, the first thing I check out is the library. And I want to walk in and see books. Mm-hmm. I don't want to see computers. I want to see books. But it was a very important place. And then when the library was going to move from the West Avenue location over to Amity Street, mm-hmm. That's another tale, they were selling books. And they had a two-stack little bookshelf case filled with leather-bound, very good bound books. It was called the Harvard 5-Foot Shelf of Books. And in 1890, it was considered, you were considered an educated man if you read all of them. They were the classics.
Okay.
I paid 5 cents a piece for them.
Wow.
I think it cost me $5.
Yeah.
And I still have them. And I don't know what to do with them.
I'd love to see them. They sound.
Huh?
I said I'd love to see them. They sound gorgeous.
I can't find the book on Herodotus, but I've got it on order from another library. But it's everything. I go through and think, my gosh, if I read all these books, I would be educated. And the things, I mean, the books are there. They have that. They were published in 1890 something, first edition, I think. I consider them valuable.
Yeah.
And over the years, they've been in very good condition there. But there's a little musty smell there, which I get a whiff of it every once in a while as I'm sitting at my computer. Where did that smell come from? The library on Amity Street was very interesting. There used to be a house there where the library was, next to Let Mers's house, which was on Amity Street right there. And that was occupied by the Flagg family. It was a nice little village. It was pretty, and snow in the 40s during the war years. My gosh, we had snow that was 5 feet tall. We used to build cave rooms in the snowbanks like that. And I remember when I was in 2nd grade, one February afternoon, Mr. Woods announced that the school was shutting down early because the blizzard was on its way. So can you imagine? Because we lived in the village, we could not ride the school bus. We had to walk. And some kids, like the Davison kids, lived way up on the west end on the canal. Other kids lived across the canal, way down a Big Ridge Road, and they had to walk, we were coming down, there we were, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and the seniors overlooking us all, trudging down. But there was a little candy store at where the new firehouse is down there. Right across the street, there's a gas station and a candy store called Pops. And of course, we had to stop at Pops. And we would do that, but the seniors watched us as we walked down towards our homes and things like that. It was a beautiful town. It was a famous town for its elm trees. Mm. And along Lyle Avenue, just past the railroad bridge. That's Lyle Avenue to me. In the fall, when the elm trees burst into yellow leaves and the sun was glowing there in the afternoon in September and October, you felt like you were walking through a world of gold. It was just magical like that. And we all took it in. I mean, we were very much attuned to nature around us because we weren't riding a bus. We were walking. We could feel it. We could smell the flowers like that. And I remember the first time, my 8th birthday, my mother was having a party for me, but I discovered violets growing around the bank, and I didn't want to go to the birthday party. I wanted to see the violets, So it was so many other tales out there, but I thought, no, there you are. The railroad was busy. I remember going inside the railroad station and sitting at the microphone, and they used the little teletype there. I had no idea what it was, but I was teletyping out like that. And I learned in subsequent years when I was doing a lot of background reading on genealogy and stuff, when Governor DeWitt Clinton, established the Erie Canal, he opened up the western half of New York State, which was the grain belt. It was also made Spencerport the cabbage capital of the eastern seaboard of the United States, because they could afford to ship their grain and their cabbage down to the Hudson River and then on down to where civilization was, like that. And we were, and then I know that Queen Victoria in England considered the grain grown in western Monroe County, i.e. Ogden, Sweden, and probably Wheatland, which would make sense, to make the best pastries. And every year she would order 6,000 1-pound bags of pastry, flour, to be shipped to all of her official residences in England.
Wow.
So it's amazing when you think back how much was going on here. Batavia actually was a very busy town there. My great-grandfather got his property, which is on the corner of Whittier and Brower Road now. He had to go to Batavia to get the deed there, not to Rochester. Brockport was another fascinating town. Agriculture, inventing farm tools and stuff, because remember this, 45 years earlier, in 1900, 90% of the people of America lived or worked on farms. They needed the equipment and things like that. And so farming was very big. But then as the years came on and industrialization took over, farming, as you know today, I go down streets now and I see these farms and I'm seeing they're becoming solar energy fields. The Chapman Farm on the corner of Whittier and Union Street. Those brothers, they are related to Johnny Appleseed, who was John Chapman, and they were very smart people. I remember one of the Chapman brothers told his daughter that the moneymakers lived on the east side of the river and all the workers lived on the west side of the river. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed, But those farms are being turned over now into solar farms because the farmers can't make it. You've got to have at least 5,000 acres now to do it. And, there were farm families that we would, my father grew peas up on the Talbot farm in the 40s, and there was Clapp's baby food. Clapp's baby food was Gerber's baby food to us, and it was on Mount Reed Boulevard. The pea vinery was down just about a quarter mile south of Palmer Corners on Union Street. The little dirt lane going back there, and up until a couple of decades ago, about in the 60s, the pea vinery barns were still visible there. My father would be out in the field at 4:30 in the morning in late June with the guy who bought the peas from him, checking for freshness and, okay, harvest them. And this machine would come out making this gosh awful noise and terrorize the neighborhood. And they would load the trucks up with these great big mound of peas, and we all hop in the cab of the truck and go down to the pea vinery and watch our peas being made into Clapp's smashed peas. And my father would go to the farmer's market in Rochester, and we would pack the produce up at night. The cucumbers were all polished and laid out, and the melon were laid out, and the corn and the peaches and stuff. And my father's pickup truck was loaded to the hilt with that. And we would leave at 3:30 in the morning and go to the Rochester Public Market. But it didn't open until 5. So what do you do between 3:30 and 5? You go to the local restaurant and have the biggest meal of the day there. But we would go to the farmers market, and that's where all the politicians came. That was the place to be. Jimmy's restaurant was down there, and I always had a hamburger, Coca-Cola, and apple pie a la mode. Every Saturday, that's what I at 4 o'clock in the morning.
4 in the morning.
That's how I want to start my day. That sounds
Royal
great.
Crown Cola was the drink of choice back in those days, and then we would come home and we'd do it all over again. We'd go out in the fields and work like that. And the nice thing about back in those days, all the boys in the village had a chance to work. Kids could get jobs, because then something happened in the 60s or 50s, and they changed the work laws. You couldn't work up until age 16, but a lot of young kids, a lot of young guys bought their jalopies with money they earned on my father's farm and his brother and other farmers around the area. They sustained it. We sustained families thousands of miles from here like that, but it was a farming community again, and the library was it was an important thing. We took it for granted sometimes, but it was there. It was our little cultural center. And once in a while, behind the library on the firehouse was an old house. There was a little house there. And a man by the name of George Race lived in it. He had to be in his 80s, and he worked for my father on the farm. And he also worked at the funeral home across the street from where he was. And one day I followed him home and everything. He took me inside to introduce me to his wife. Well, I thought I had stepped back into the 1860s. I mean, I couldn't believe it. The house, I'm like, it would fit perfect back in 1855 and 1860. This little old lady in her Victoriana outfit and everything. And that house was knocked down eventually, and behind that was what is now the complex on the corner right across from the white church here. That building, it's stores and things now, but that used to be where the Women's Home Bureau met, and we would have summer shows there. And I remember going there, having festivals there and shows and things like that. So it was a community that it didn't have the money as maybe other communities had, but it had the willingness to do something out there, to unify us all, young and old alike like that. And on Maplewood Avenue was a family. They had a little manufacturing company. They did tool and die type stuff. No, I'm not going to go there. When George Vincent, who was the manager of the bank downtown, needed a secretary, the job went out, and the notice went out, and Helen Morabito was the secretarial major at Spencerport. She's very well trained. She had shorthand, typing, the whole business curriculum out there. And let me tell you, those young women were trained.
Yeah.
They really were trained. And the daughter of the people on Maplewood Avenue who owned the little tool and die, they were socially up there. She wanted the job too. And George Vincent gave the job to Helen Morabito because she was qualified. Yeah. The other one wasn't. Well, the few and spew over that thing, But I think that we realized that fair is fair. Fair is fair like that. And it was fair back in those days. Joe, the black man up there, was looked after by other people. And he had to be in his 70s or 80s or something like that. And he wasn't ostracized or anything. We never knew, well, he's dark and we're not, and things like that. We just took him for granted, and he's part of our life, And so it was, again, we were very isolated from the realities of the world out there. If you didn't have a car, you didn't go anywhere. And that's about some of the highlights there, for that matter.
That's great. I mean,
I haven't told you all.
I was going to say, I'm sure we can go on forever. Is there anything you'd like to ask, Caitlin?
Well, when you say town fathers, do you mean like the founding fathers of the town, or do you mean like the parents of the children?
What?
When you said the town fathers,
Well, there were people. There were like Art Kincaid and Ken Barkley, they and Let Murs. They were solid. They were what was the name? Gay Lenhart's stepfather was the town clerk. There were people in town who were very, they were they were respected.
Mm-hmm.
And the town, not having much money, did the very best they could, and it was well managed. Town fathers were whoever had time to do it, I guess. The businessmen, they closed the stuff. Farmers worked 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
Farmers couldn't do that. They were busy out in the field, and after you till 20 acres of land, you're not about to go to a town meeting. But when you close your store down and your staff goes home, you have the energy to go out and run the other part of the town there and to make sure that everything is going fine like that. I thought we were a very nice town. Everybody knew everybody. Al Bowers was the guy. That was Gay Lenhart's stepfather. And I remember when Gay and her brother Pat came to town. And everybody knew everybody. It wasn't, these omnipotent politicians off on a throne somewhere. They lived next door to you, for that matter. In fact, Charlie Ballard, the town chief of police, was my neighbor on Market Street.
No kidding.
Oh, yeah, I knew Charlie. He had 2 daughters. Yeah, I knew Charlie. And Homer Barton, who was Mrs. Stewart's son-in-law, lived up on Chambers Street. And then when Mrs. Stewart passed away, he and Carol moved right down to her house on West Avenue. He was a county sheriff. Stub Vickery on the Brockport Spencerport Road, just catty corner up a bit from... where the apartment buildings are when you go around the corner on Brockport, Spencerport? No, the old $1 Million Highway by the cemetery.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, there's a White House there. And Stub Vickery was there, and he was Monroe County Sheriff. He took us over to Mendon Ponds to see the Monroe County stables over there. So we got around like that. We thought of, what an innocent world. The relationship with the local police is a very close relationship. When my father died back in 1999, a young policeman from the town came up, and we found out he was the grandson of my mother's best friend, who died while we were in Florida on Christmas of 1955, Jesse Barton. And he never knew his grandmother, so he's in the house, and my father's sitting in a chair, gone, and we're talking about his grandmother, how close friends were. We looked at the police as the sons and daughters, and now I have cousins who are Monroe County sheriffs, and they're stationed right in next to the expressway up here.
I think I know. I think one of them gave me a ticket the other day. I think one of them gave me a ticket the other day.
If I could do something for you, I would.
It's all paid and everything.
I'm looking out for myself, and if I ever get stopped by a young girl who looks vaguely like a Chapman, I'm going to say, "I'm your cousin." You can't do that, But it was a town that everybody seemed to know everybody. It was an intimate town. We had 3 or 4 grocery stores. We had Salatan's department store.
Wow.
We had Rexall, the Austin Brothers drugstore, which I worked in for a couple of years. And if you think I'm a fluid speaker now, you should have seen me when I was 20. I stuttered all over the place, but we worked there. And then Bob Tutty started the Penny Saver in the old post office building right across from Austin's drugstore. And I started out there. I had a year of college, and they came up to my house one day and said, "Come on down and work for me." So I worked in a print shop. It was the ABC print shop, and he started printing a Penny Saver. And it was filled with everything. And we would sit there in the front window of the old post office in the Penny Saver, and the siren would blow. And we'd put our pens and pencils down, and we'd look up the street towards Bruckner's. Bruckner's was the local gathering place for a lot of people in town. And we watched the firemen pour out of Bruckner's and run down, if they could, run down to the firehouse. They put the fires out like that. And so it was a fun little town. When the canal bell would ring in the summertime, we'd all scoot all over. We'd all run to get on the bridge so we could ride up there, and then ride down. Simple joys like that. We got a lot out of them. we grew up listening to radio, and then when television came along, it kind of negated all of that. You didn't need people anymore, and I miss the summer evening walks and saying hi, how are you, stopping to chat, and then going on to the next house. And that's how you got to see people from one side of town to the other side of town. Meet people you ordinarily would never have met, young or old for that matter. And so it was a fond memory that I have. So many other things were going on, the little tales of this and that, but it was every summer the town would send us to Peter's Pool to go swimming on Ridge Road. Now, Peter's Pool was a beautiful key-shaped pool, brook-fed with the coldest water you could ever, and a teapot of boiling water wasn't going to do it for me. And then we took our swimming lesson. A lot of us went from pollywogs to, real good swimmers. I was the eternal pollywog. And then we would go to we were knot holders. We would go to the Rochester Red Wings every summer. Oh, on the weekends, they had the bus there. We'd go to the stadium to watch the Red Wings play. And I saw Dr. Bobby Brown play shortstop for the second base for a visiting team. He went on to play for the New York Yankees, and then he went on into medicine. So we got to see a lot of interesting people. Steve Bilko, Russ Derry, Charlie Marshall. Those are names that you know nothing about, but they were local heroes and everything. And so the town did what it could do for us, and we were very thankful for that. Our expectations weren't that high. So whatever we got, we were very happy about it.
That's wonderful.
The churches were very important up there. I break churches down, very interesting. In Spencerport, the white church, all the shop owners went to the white church. All the cosmopolitan intellectuals went to the Methodist church, and all the Catholics went to St. John. The rest of us went to Ogden Presbyterian or the Baptist church up on Washington Street. That's how we did it that way. It's the village and the town. They were interlocked like that because a lot of farm kids came into town, and I went through school. My brothers and sister and I went through school with our cousins on both sides of the family, and we all had the same memories and things like that. And we all had the same teachers. We had Mildred Snyder, who said when new math came in, she went out, and she was the 7th and 8th grade math teacher. And I remember one day in 8th grade math, she walked in one morning, she said, "Students, don't do drugs. Don't go near them." And then, what is she talking about, you know? The only people I knew who did drugs were jazz musicians like that. That's how innocent we were like that. And we listened to the teachers. I was privileged to have in my senior year, one afternoon, Ada Cosgrove came in one day to substitute from Leo Burnaby, who was out that day. And the Problems of Democracy class, or one of our classes there, and there were about 10 or 11 of us, and you could never have seen a more respectful group of students in your life. She was a living icon, Ada Cosgrove. And then we had, Mrs. Trimmer, and then we had Mrs. Spencer, who lived on West Avenue. The teachers lived in the community like that. And I remember when Leo Burnaby came. Now, he was very important. When the war was over with, the government of the United States did the smartest thing in the world, the GI Bill. Took these guys, a lot of them from backwater towns and cities, and gave them an education. And war ended in August of 45, and in September of 1949, the graduates from the educational facilities came to schools all across New York State. We had an influx of male teachers. I never had a male teacher.
Yeah.
And one day I walk into the study hall for my first day of school, and there's Leo Burnaby. And I thought, oh my God, we got a male teacher. And I remember one of the students, catty corner from me, was distracted, and Mr. Burnaby went up and right across the face. I had never seen that. I said, oh, are we in for it now? Well, would you know, 6 years later, that same student who got whacked across the face jumped off a rock. We were having our final outing at Hamlin Beach State Park as seniors, and he jumped off a rock and got a concussion or something, and Leo Burnaby took him to the doctor.
Oh
and
my
something
gosh.
like that. So that
Full
was that,
circle.
you know. And what goes around comes around. But Leo Burnaby, Michael Federation, Mr. Bly, who was the chemistry teacher, he's fondly remembered. Then Bill Farnsworth came along. These were men. They lived here in the community. They had their children in the community like that, and I think that that's important because they're not trekking in from other places like that. So the male teachers turned the school. The women who were the single women who were the teachers were very good. They knew their business. The men came in, and all of a sudden Johnny couldn't read. Now, Johnny could always read before the men came. No, that's not against, that's a phenomenon because Johnny could always read. Then 1950, Johnny suddenly was not able to read, you know? And we don't, maybe it was the diversions from television and stuff like that. And people had money now, they could travel around. And when you were in the war years in Spencerport, you didn't have too many distractions. You went to school. That's where you had your social life and an awful lot like that. And you studied. But then in the 50s, when television started taking over, and it changed the whole societal a picture out there, students began to have problems. And to my point of view, from what I was in the middle of it, but we were as I say, we were the last generation allowed to be children. And when puberty hit and adolescence came around, he's going through adolescence, be very kind to him, okay? We were recognized as adolescents, and we were treated like adolescents, and then Elvis came along, and that went right out the window. We didn't have Elvis. We had How Much Is That Hot Doggy in the Window, and Mule Train like that. We had crazy music like that, but we were allowed to be children. And I talked with, we had our 50th reunion back in 2005, and I talked with a lot of my friends there that I grew up with, and they were solid. They knew who they were. And they said that the class of 55 was the class of the decade. That was something about that class that was very unique and different. Many of us went on to college, and those that didn't became very solid, substantial people. In fact, Dick Ziegler, who died recently, was buried in his fireman's uniform, and he was
Really?
a farmer. I remember when he came in 5th grade, his name was Richard LaRue, and he was adopted by the Ziegler family on Gillette Road. They had a farm, and she worked at the cafeteria up at the high school. And he was very proud to be a fireman. That was a big thing in the village, to be a fireman. If there ever was a political party in Spencerport, it was the Spencerport Fire Department. Because they were unified, they had a lot of impact on things. And there wasn't much impact on, as I recall, you know. People were busy, you know, the war was going on, getting through that, losing loved ones, waiting for loved ones to come back home, and then getting back into the swing of things. And when the 50s came along, you went for Sunday drives. And I remember people starting out at 6 o'clock on a Saturday night, going up to Old Forge and coming back.
Yeah.
They loved, gas was 19 cents a gallon back then. You did stuff like that, but as, you know, times and circumstances change a lot of things. And right now I live in a community in North Charlotte called College Green. It's being discovered by people because you think it's only 4 or 5 houses, but there are 185 there. It's got a circle it's almost a mile long. People bring families there. They're doggy buggies. Ever see a doggy buggy? Embarrassed to say I have too. I pushed one. The whole families come there. They want that walk aroundness. They want to say, hi, how are you? And people like that. It's trying to go back to a more sane time and with more reasonable expectations, I think. And I mean, I am forever shaped by my early years in this village, forever shaped. And there will be people after me who will see it from a different angle like that. But I'm talking as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old person. And what my impression was at the time, and how I worked into it and everything, how the people treated me. you were respectful of people, you respected your teachers, and of course, what would your teacher think if she knew you did that? And that kept you on the straight and narrow, let me tell you. So, we had that even at a very young age, people understood.